As we continue looking at the Sermon on the Mount, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Do not think that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men to do so will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you, unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, which a synonym for us today would be fool, shall be in danger of the council. Whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you're on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you, for it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason, except sexual immorality, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to God. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. Well, I was going to say you could do that now. Hairdressers can do that. But let your yes be yes and your no be no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. For you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Last week, we talked a little bit about the first few verses of the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes. It's the document that Jesus gave us. It's a declaration of the kingdom. It's how believers are supposed to live. Blessed are the poor in spirit. They know they're sinners. They know they have no spiritual good, no right standing with God in and of themselves. Okay? Blessed are those who mourn, they will be comforted. These mourners are not those mourning death, but those who are mourning their own sinful condition. Blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. And we said meek does not mean a wimp or a pushover or someone who backs down, but it means someone who's in control of their anger. That's someone who is meek, someone who wants to pay retribution to somebody, but they withhold it because they want to do God's will. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. God, give us a hunger and thirst for your righteousness. Blessed are the merciful, you have to give mercy to get mercy. Okay? Blessed are the pure in heart, they will see God. Okay? Blessed are the peacemakers, they will be called sons of God. You may be a peacemaker, we talked about last week, who stands between two feuding parties, or you may be a peacemaker who is making peace between yourself and someone else, someone who has wronged you, and you have the right to be angry or whatever, but you decide to make peace, like the example Bob talked about in class this morning. Okay. Now, in verse 13, Jesus says to his followers, you are the salt of the earth. In Jesus' time, salt was a valuable commodity. Okay. Sometimes deals were made with salt being the payment. Sometimes people were paid their wages in salt. Okay. It was a commodity. It was valuable. So when Jesus said that, number one, he's saying you're valuable. Number two, we all know what salt does. It preserves. Okay. And you are supposed to be preservative for the earth, for your circle of influence. Who knows? You are the salt for those people. You are the one who is preserving them possibly. Disciples. We like salt because it has a preserving influence. You and I have a preserving influence. Disciples are like salt also because they add flavor. Okay, we should be flavorful people. But Christians should not be dull. They should not be, I don't know how to put that. Should not be bland. We should be praising and thanking. And that doesn't mean we're all going to be, happy and jumping around all the time. But my goodness, don't walk around with a sour look on your face. Smile once in a while. Disciples are the salt because they add flavor. Too many Christians, my commentary said, lose their flavor and become good for nothing, and then they are trampled underfoot. Doesn't mean they're not saved. Doesn't mean that, but it means they're not doing what Jesus has called them to do. Then Jesus says to his disciples and to us, you're the light of the world. Who else did Jesus say was the light of the world? He said, I am. A couple times, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Now he says to his disciples, you are the light of the world. And when he says you're salt and you're light, he didn't say you will become this after so many classes, you will become this after going to seminary. He didn't say you will become salt and light after you've been a Christian for 10 years. No, he said you are salt and light. Now, you are those things. You're the light of the world. We're not only to be light receivers, but also light givers. David Gruzik in his commentary says Jesus never challenged us to become light. He simply said we are. And we are either fulfilling or failing that responsibility that he's given us. He also says that salt is needed because the world is going down. And if our Christian walk is also following after the world, it won't do any good. Light is needed because the world is in darkness. And if our Christian walk imitates the world or imitates darkness, we have nothing to show the world. And we let our light shine. Why? Not to bring glory to ourselves, but to bring glory to God. There is no such thing, I don't believe, as a secret Christian. Okay? We celebrate baptism publicly as a proclamation. We worship together because we can assemble freely without fear of persecution. We do that. We come together. Okay? I don't think there's any such thing as a secret Christian. So there's no need for us to fear letting our light shine. Now we know that let it shine like a city on a hill that people can see from miles and miles away. We know that there are places in the world where there's persecution, but even where the church is underground and hiding for fear of government retribution, still those churches are being light. They're still being salt, even though they're hidden from the government. Okay, Jesus said, I didn't come to destroy the law and the prophets. I came to fulfill. And Jesus starts in on this discussion of the law here, and he wants to make it clear that he didn't come in opposition to what God had given Israel in the Old Testament. He didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. Jesus lived the entire law, his life, in his 33 somewhat years on earth. He lived the law, but he wanted to make it clear that he had an authority that was above the law. Okay, he had an authority that came from God. Even so, even with that authority that he had, he did nothing in contradiction to the law. He never broke the law of God. He fulfilled all the teachings of the prophets Jesus fulfilled what the prophets predicted, being the Messiah. He fulfilled the moral and legal demands of the law, and he fulfilled the penalty of the law for us by his death on the cross, taking the penalty that we should have received. He talks about one jot or one tittle not being passing until all the law is fulfilled. The jot and the tittle were real small punctuation marks or whatever in Hebrew writing. And this shows us that even the smallest details of the law and the smallest details of our lives are important to God. Jesus said, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men to do so will be least in the kingdom of heaven. But he that does them and teaches men to do them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And then he throws in this phrase. He says, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus raised the bar considerably. And he does this again later when we read his comments about murder and adultery. Okay? The law does not give us right standing before God. Jesus does. Jesus gives us right standing before God. And yet, Jesus inserted love into how the law should be interpreted. There's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law. I read a story. This is supposedly true, happened in 1992 in Israel in an Orthodox Jewish neighborhood that an apartment building caught on fire, and it was on the Sabbath day. And the devout Jewish occupants debated whether or not they could call the fire department because it was the Sabbath day and that would be considered work. It was considered work being on your phone on the Sabbath day. Holy cow, I would be condemned to hell. I'm on my phone constantly. But think about that. This apartment's on fire and these devout Jews are saying, because they're so hung up on the law, is it okay to call the fire department? They sent someone to a rabbi, and the rabbi, after contemplating it for a while, said, yes, you can call the fire department. It's an emergency. By this time, that complex was engulfed and the one next to it. Okay, supposedly a true story, because they wanted to hold to the letter of the law. Now, we could argue about that. Is what they did wrong? Was what they did showing devotion to the law? Well, I don't think so. That kind of goes along with the story of the Good Samaritan. The priest and the other guy that went by, the scribe that went by, they left the guy laying there. He was injured. He probably had blood on him. He was unclean. They maintained the letter of the law, but it was the Good Samaritan that held up the spirit of the law. The letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. We see consistency in this in all of Jesus' teachings. We see it in the incident where the woman caught in adultery was brought to Jesus. The letter of the law says she should be stoned. But the spirit of the law said, forgiveness, confess your sin. You know the story that all the guys were going to stone her, and Jesus said, let you who's without sin throw the first rock. They all dropped the rocks and walked away. He said to the woman, where are your accusers? Does anyone condemn you? No, Lord. He says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Jesus had the authority to do that, to forgive sin, And that's the notable difference between Jesus and the Pharisees. In Philippians 3, 6 through 9, Paul talks about two kinds of righteousness by the law and righteousness by faith in Jesus. And it says, concerning the righteousness which is the law, which was in the law, I was blameless. But what things were gained to me, I have counted loss for Christ. But indeed I count all things loss, that I may gain Christ and be found in him, not having my own righteousness which is from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which is from faith in God. So, we are not, nor has man ever been made righteous by keeping the law. And aren't we thankful for that? That Jesus gave us a different kind of righteousness that we can attain thanks to him. Not because of anything that we do, but because of what he did. It's a righteousness that we can never earn, we can never live up to. But it's placed upon us, it's placed in us when we believe in him. Now, Jesus starts talking about the law here, and he says, you've heard that it was said, you shall not murder, but I say to you. And when he says that, I say to you, he's saying that with authority. He's saying that with authority. And he says, you've heard the Pharisees say that you shouldn't murder, but I say if you have ill intent in your heart towards somebody, you're guilty of murder. And then he goes on to talk about adultery, and he says, before that, he talks about the offering. If you bring an offering to the altar and you realize you have an issue with a brother, go make that right. And then you come back and make your offering. Then when he talks about adultery, he says, again, you've heard that it was said you should not commit adultery, talking about the law and the teaching of the Pharisees. But I say to you, whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery. Again, with the law and with the teachers of that day, they were teaching that acts were wrong. It's the external. It's the external that's wrong. Jesus says, you got to be above your righteousness has to exceed the Pharisees. It's not just the act, it's the intent. It's the thoughts in your mind and in your heart. And that is a high standard. That is a high standard. And this applies a lot more to men looking at women or women looking at men. It applies to just about anything that we could desire with our heart or mind, or anything that might tempt us. It applies to that also. And then he says, and thank goodness, Jesus is not talking literally about this, where he says, look, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off, because it's better to go through life half blind and half crippled than it is to be sent to hell. He did not mean that literally. Otherwise, most of us would have no eyes and no hands by now, and that would not be a good thing. Jesus is saying being obedient is not easy. It requires sacrifice and yielding our will to his. And also, think about this. The reason that this is not literal is because I can pluck out an eye and I can cut off a hand and I can still sin. Okay, I can still covet. I can still have bad intentions towards my neighbor. Then Jesus talks about divorce, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, other than to say that, again, the law dealt with what was external, not with heart or intent. Jewish men were taking advantage of the law to divorce their wives, whose only sin may have been that they didn't please their husbands 100% of the time. And it goes back to Deuteronomy 24, if you want to read it. And the Pharisees had taken a loose interpretation of this that benefited men in the culture and made it easy for them to put away their wives for just about any reason. And Jesus was saying this is wrong. Jesus then talks about oaths. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. The reason I'm pausing a lot on here, I got this software on my computer where I speak and it types it out on the paper, and it's really neat and it works most of the time, but sometimes it puts words in there that I can't even read what it says here. This where it says, he says, let your yes be yes, it's got let your yes be USPS, United States Postal Service. Okay, so that's why I'm struggling a little bit. Didn't proofread. Okay, so let your yes be yes and your no be no. Now, Jesus isn't saying that all oaths are bad. We know that in a court of law, you're asked to put your hand on the Bible and raise your other hand and say, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But I think what Jesus is saying here is, if a person is a liar, do you think swearing to tell the truth is going to mean what they tell you is going to be the truth? Not necessarily. He says, let your yes be yes. He's not saying there's an absolute prohibition on any oath, but he's saying be a person of your word. You know, we take an oath when we get married. We take an oath. So yeah, oaths are good. Covenants are good. Okay, agreements are good. But let your yes be yes and your no be no. There's probably no greater characteristic that a Christian man or woman, boy or girl, can have than to be a person of your word. That's probably the greatest character issue. And you want to talk about being called a hypocrite. If we don't live up to that, then we will be hypocrites. Okay. Now, Jesus starts talking then about an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And you all probably knew this, but I really didn't pay attention to this until I read it in the commentary. But the law of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was not to reimburse you or to get even. It was to limit retribution. Okay? Think about that. I never considered that before. Man, I wish I was so smart when I read the Bible I could pick these things out. But it was saying if in the law, and again, it's the external, it's not in the heart. If somebody causes me to lose my eye, I get to cause them to lose their eye. Okay? Retribution must be fair. Punishment must fit the crime. Okay? How many of you, I remember in high school I had to read the Shakespeare play Merchant of Venice. Anybody ever read that? Remember that? The Merchant of Venice, there's this guy, this merchant, and I'm going to give you the Bob Russell abridged version, okay? This merchant loaned money to this young man, and their agreement was if he couldn't pay it back at the appointed time, he had to give a pound of his flesh, okay? So time went by. The guy couldn't repay the debt. The merchant wanted his pound of flesh, so they went before the judge, and the judge heard the arguments from both sides, and the judge said, yes, you are entitled to a pound of this man's flesh, and you may take his flesh right now. However, you may not spill one drop of his blood. Aha! Oh, so the merchant was a sadistic guy, and he was ready to cut a chunk out of this guy's leg or arm or something, but that stopped it. Okay, you're entitled to a pound of flesh, but you're not entitled to blood. That's what an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was. It was a limit on retribution so that no one took advantage. And in the Merchant of Venice, long story short, the guy regained his wealth. He paid off the loan. He got the girl in the end. So, okay, it was all good. Merchant of Venice, it is a pretty good play. And that judge in that book was really Solomon-like in his judgment. It was really pretty cool. Then Jesus says, if someone slaps you on the cheek, or as my voice thing said here, if someone slideshow the right cheek, I don't know what that means. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek. This goes back to what Jesus said in the beginning. The meek will inherit the earth. A meek person will turn the other cheek. It doesn't mean they like it. It doesn't mean that they're not entitled to strike out, but it means they're a meek person. They're in control of their anger. So you turn the other cheek. Jesus says, then he talks about if somebody compels you to go a mile. In Jesus' time, the Romans were there. The Israelites hated them, but they could, under the law, a Roman soldier could command any Jewish citizen to carry their bag for them or their pack for them for a mile. Jesus says if they do this, offer to go two. Offer to go the extra mile. And then he says, he goes into this discourse on don't just love your neighbor and hate your enemy, love everybody. Don't just pray for those that love you, pray for everybody. Don't just do good to those who do good to you, do good to everybody. Anyone can love those who love them. It takes a strong person to love someone who doesn't love us or who has hurt us. The things that Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount are not things that the world teaches. We talked a little bit in class today, what's the culture of the world? Or somebody that's not saved, what's their culture? It's not this. This is not the culture of the world. This is the culture of a kingdom dweller. These are the character traits of the citizens of God's kingdom. And there should be more required of us than non-believers. We claim we have something that others don't have, but what does the world see in us? If we have the Spirit of God dwelling in us, then we will be salt and we will be light. According to God's word, we have a better future waiting for us than those who do not know Jesus. Are we praying for our lost friends and family members? Jesus set the bar really, really high then in verse 48 when he says, be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Anybody here perfect? Raise your hand. Gary, put your hand down. Right? No, I'm just kidding. He didn't raise his hand. I'm just kidding.
I want to know why.
Why? Yeah. That's not your question. Ask Diane when you get home. Okay? Jesus said, be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. If we would live the way Jesus described in the Sermon on the Mount, we still wouldn't be perfect, but we'd be closer to perfect. We'd share a more intimate relationship with God. We would always be people of our word. We would let God defend our personal rights. We wouldn't let anger or a sinful heart want us to seek revenge. We would always love our neighbors, and that includes our enemies. Only Jesus was perfect. So Jesus was not kidding when he said he expects our righteousness to exceed that of the Pharisees and scribes. He set a high standard for those who follow him. And man, I struggle with those every day. But I say to you today, the words that Jesus said, you are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. Perhaps we need to stop looking at what's wrong in the world and focus more on living as Jesus taught. It's nothing new, and we talk about it often, and we just need to do it. God, help us to live the life that Jesus describes in Matthew 5. Susan, would you come? And we're going to sing a couple verses of a closing hymn, and we just invite you to respond to the Holy Spirit however you need to this morning.